You keep asking, I think understandably, the Green Party has no chance. Why should I even care? It's a chicken and the egg situation, Dr. Dyson.
Right.
Somebody has to start fighting. And I would argue, I want to put this on the table because I don't know, this hasn't been put out there yet, that it is not just symbolic to vote for the Green Party in this election or any election. If they get 5% of the vote, they can get millions of dollars in federal funding that helps them get automatic ballot access, and also some money to start to try to assert themselves against a Democratic Party that is able to fundraise $1 billion in the 100-odd days of Kamala Harris's campaign. And by the way, squander it all so that Kamala Harris is now sending out emails begging people to give her money so that she can forgive her debt. Well, what about the 44 million Americans who Joe Biden promised debt forgiveness to? Sorry, if we use the same logic here, it's not fair for us to have to pay for your debt when other people have paid off of theirs. That's what the Democratic Party talking heads have been telling the 44 million Americans, including a disproportionate number of Black Americans who have been suffering under the yoke of student debt, not to mention medical debt, not to mention trade school debt, not to mention housing debt, not to mention the cost of living crisis, all of these things, which you never hear the Democrats talking passionately about. What they talk passionately about is how Donald Trump is a fascist, how he's an unethical person, and how, I guess, representation matters.
Well, wait, okay, hold on. So wait a minute. I want to go back to what you just said. Then, first of all, I believe all that's true. So you got me.
Sure,
there.
but it's not motivating voters.
Well, wait, hold on. Let me say this. So to me, racism is a dry run for fascism. Everything that people are worried about in fascist politics have been practiced on Black people first, in terms of not being able to vote, not having an ability to govern the institutions that govern you, to be able to control them. All the stuff we're concerned about, the kind of teleological analysis of what the ultimate end of fascism eventuates in, and how that corrupts the possibility of democratic politics and the ability of people to actually exist without the interference of a top-down hierarchical imposition on their lives of values that are essentially foreign to them. Okay, good. But I want to go back to what you said. Look, it's like what I used to say when I was teaching early hip hop stuff. And they were like, well, it's the independents, out here, I'm selling my CDs out my car versus Sony. Bro, the moment you are selling your CD out the back of your car, I don't know, Too Short, whoever, you in the game. The question is, to what degree do you find yourself implicated in some of the transactions that are able to yield the thing you desire? So when I hear Miss Gray talking about, if we get up to 5% and that will automatically trip, the mechanisms that will get you in the game. What you're doing is making an analysis about when and where you enter, to deploy that term, that you get in. And, if we do it at this particular amount, this will happen, this will result. You doing the same thing that others of us who have made calculations about where we enter, what we can do, how we can use a system, because that's what you're talking about. We're talking about using an extant system to fund the ultimately revolutionary, or at least subversive, impulses of a progressive politic in order to achieve your goal. Amen. But that's what other people are doing as well.
How are they doing that, Dr. Dyson? They're not doing that. What we're hearing when we turn on MSNBC and CNN every day is why we can't have nice things. Even look, I want to come to some of the, I think, optimistic takes that have come out of this election, where people who have really defended the Democratic Party up until this point are now saying, actually, Bernie was right about a lot of stuff. Right. But before I get there, I want to say there are a lot of people who are still manufacturing consent for the Democratic Party's choices in an election that they lost. With all due respect, Joy-Ann Reid hopped on her show and said that Kamala Harris had run a flawless and unimpeachable campaign because Queen Latifah endorsed her, and Queen Latifah never endorses anybody.
And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift, she had the Swifties, she had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
You had the women of The View
Miss Gray.
saying,
Miss Gray. That's a
direct. That is a direct. We can insert the clip. If you wanted me to wait, I can find it and pull it up.
I'm saying, but Joy Reid got more substantive arguments.
Okay, that's what was said. What was said. The women of The View said something very similar. Nancy Pelosi is willing to sort of throw Joe Biden under the bus a little bit, but take no responsibility for a Democratic establishment that insisted for years that Joe Biden was cogent and able to lead when it is quite obvious that he was not. And that is why he had to drop out of the presidential race and hand it over to his vice president. There has still not been an accounting for that enormous campaign of misinformation against the American public litigated by the Democratic Party that pretends to care so much about misinformation in the media. So I resist the idea that what I am arguing for, what the left is arguing for, and what the Democratic Party is doing is the same. They are persuading voters that they are wrong. They are saying the economy is good, actually. That because the macro economy is good, you shouldn't care about the fact that your groceries are 40% higher than they were when Donald Trump was president. Whether or not it was Donald Trump's fault.
Kamala admitted that part.
What
right,
part?
about the groceries, and in other words, you're making an abstract argument about inflation. The increase in inflation, where wages had risen, black unemployment was down. She did concede the point you're making now about, yes, it makes a difference about what people are paying for groceries at the marketplace.
And then she pivots, though, Dr. Dyson, too. But the Biden economy was strong, but we made improvements, and she refused to make a break with Joe Biden. And look, she only had 100 days, and maybe it was too late to pivot from Joe Biden's multiple years of insistence that things were good, actually. But the fact of the matter is that she fundamentally was unwilling to break from the Democratic Party. She had this moment on The View, which now people are reflecting upon as perhaps the death knell of her campaign, where she was asked directly by Sunny Hostin whether or not there was anything she would do differently from Biden. And she said, nothing I can think of.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Well, wait. Let me say this very quickly. So at that point, what is she up against? She's up against the perception that, because these things make a difference too, political emotions, along with empirical verification of a particular viewpoint or an investment made, right? It's also about style, substance, and disposition. So she's going to crap on Joe Biden. You've been in that camp. You've been with him as you're trying to figure out what to do. So all of a sudden, you're disloyal for the purposes of political advance. You're now disloyal. No, I'm saying disloyal to the practices and policies that you all have generated, is what I'm saying. So now she acts like, oh, the guy I've been rolling with and riding with, and the guy I've been governing with, him mostly, that now all of a sudden I find him reprehensible and what he did. Now, I agree with you in the sense of, but let me distinguish myself from what those particular policies are. If we had enough time, she had 107 days. I mean, I do think what she did in that time was pretty phenomenal. I mean, can we concede that? Even given the limits of
I think she did better than Dyson. I think she did better than Biden would have, right?
She probably did better than me too, but thank you. Okay.
No, sorry. But the problem is, Dr. Dyson, Joe Biden's internal polling, we now know, showed Trump winning 400 electoral votes and had been showing that for much longer than the 100 days before the election, right? So at a certain point, you have to acknowledge that Joe Biden is unpopular. And that is why you are being tagged in this moment. So the idea that even the language that you're using, Dr. Dyson, like disloyalty and you used a series of words that I'm not forgetting, but basically kind of the relational harm.
Right.
That is not what this is about. It's not about decorum or common practice, or those seem to be things that Democrats are overwhelmingly concerned with. The vote, if Biden is polling poorly, I'm sorry.
No, I was talking about in terms of her relationship to him, particularly, not the consequence for the larger American.
I understand,
just to be clear.
but nobody cares. Do you want to win or do you want not to win?
Right.
Nobody cares. It's not about Joe Biden. It is not about anybody's personalities. And sometimes I think, with all due respect, the people who are enabled to talk about these things to most of the American public care too much about the interpersonal relationship between Biden and Harris and the optics. Nobody hungry, nobody with credit card debt gives a fig. Throw them under the bus.
Look what you just said, because we in this fight here where you TKOing me up in here. So if people at home going, did Dyson realize that Miss Gray was pummeling him? Yes, I'm conscious of it right now. But here's my point. But arise. I got a point here, and I want to make it. You said, do you want to win, Miss Gray? That is the kind of logic. That is the particular element that is the adjudicative factor between rival claims about who can make it better, who can make it worse, who's going to do the best. Your very question is what some people deploy when they say, hey, Miss Breonna Gray is one of the smartest human beings out here on earth. Wish she could even run for office. But at the end of the day, what is the practical application to my existential and political situation that would allow the relief from the suffering, hurt, and pain that I am enduring in order to endorse her political stance? And people are going to say, what the left is going to have to confront too is that y'all out here talking about, when I say y'all, I'm talking about the left, and sometimes they include me and sometimes they don't. I know a lot of leftists say you done left the party a long time ago. I get it, and I ain't mad. My point is, I'm down here on the ground with these people that the left is concerned about. I'm out here preaching in these churches. I'm out here in these political organizations. I'm out here trying to organize as much as I can, but also give some inspiration. So I'm out here with the folk as well. And the thing is, they want practical solutions.
And what's the Democratic Party offering in terms of practical solutions? The Democratic Party's not offering. Dr. Dyson, I'm afraid that you're organizing people into a burning house. The Democratic Party has demonstrated that it would rather have Republicans win than to disappoint its donor class and actually embrace the policies that would make the material improvements to those people's lives that you're talking about. There's a reason why Kamala Harris would not support an arms embargo. She took more money from Raytheon than even Donald Trump did. She's a part of an administration where the Secretary of Defense was a Raytheon board member. These are material realities that are constraining the politics of the Democratic Party, and no nice lady coming along or nice man coming along who loves his grandkids and eats an ice cream cone and puts sunshades on and hangs out with Barack Obama can change that reality. So we have to stop focusing on who these people are and what they quote unquote represent in terms of their physical appearance, and more about who they represent because of who's paid them and filled their campaign coffers.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that, but here's my point. When you said, I tell you what, let me turn this around. It ain't my podcast, but I want to ask you, since I got a smart person like you here, what is the alternative? What is the practicable, allowable, permissible politics that can be exercised in order for it to yield a benefit to the people that you and I are both concerned about? What is that?
Okay, so there's two things. Even if a Green Party doesn't win, I think you have to look to the historical precedents here and recognize that when there is a strong outside party, like we had with the communist and socialist parties in the New Deal era, that it was the labor organizing and outside political agitation from those groups that forced an FDR type figure to adopt the New Society programs that continue to be the bedrock of our social safety net. Right. So even if you don't believe that the Democratic Party will or should fall, everybody who wants the Democratic Party to be better and not just give it lip service like, oh, I agree with the left, but no, genuinely wants the Democratic Party to serve its people, to root for a third party to push it to where it needs to go. Secondly, I would say I personally don't think the Democratic Party is going to be moved. I think post-Citizens United, the full-on embrace of money in politics by both parties is a very difficult thing to untangle. They're never going to vote to unwind those interests. You have people like Nancy Pelosi who are multi-millionaires who have earned an enormous amount while they were in office somehow, who oppose bills to preclude her from insider trading every time those bills threaten to come to the floor. They're never going to vote against their own interests. And I think that we have to support third parties. It's going to be a long road. It's going to be hard, but it has to start by at least getting them ballot access and federal funding so the Democratic Party can't keep railroading them off the ballot, and they have to keep spending the few dollars that they're able to recruit from the people to defend themselves in court against the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And the third thing I would say, just to round this out, is that there is a world where we could have, and I worked for Bernie Sanders. I was his national press secretary in 2020, that there was a path within the Democratic Party. If we had supported Bernie Sanders back in 2016 and 2020, that could have been an off-ramp for this fascism. He was someone who capitalized on, engaged with, understood the economic anxiety, yes, and the angst and the frustration of working people of all races across the aisle, and channeled that energy into a left populist campaign. And when the Democratic Party killed that, the only other option remaining was right populism. And you said that you liked Bernie Sanders, you supported Bernie Sanders, but I'm curious, did you actually support him in the 2016 primary? Did you actually support and endorse him and speak out in favor of him in the context of the 2020 primary?
No, because there are a lot of people whose ideas I dig, but who I was committed to, and who I wanted to see win. But I, in terms of 2016, when I made the ultimate decision, I think that was that Hillary? I'm trying to think. 2016.
Yes.
As he did, right? As Bernie Sanders ultimately did. I made that decision for the same reason Bernie Sanders made that decision.
No, but we're talking about the primary. The primary.
No. In the primary, no, I was not a Bernie Sanders delegate or supporter at that particular point.
So why?
I think that Hillary Clinton is not only the smartest person, the most prepared person, but the person who has given the most credible empirical analysis of race in the last 20 years by a major American politician. I'll stand by that. Absolutely. At the end of the day, I'm rolling with HRC to the end because I think she gives a serious indication of what's happening in this country racially.
Why not?
I was nobody's. Right? I was nobody's at that point because I was writing. Look, I wrote a piece. I think when I wrote a piece on Hillary Clinton, right? So I was not technically, with wearing my journalist hat, doing an analysis of who, what, and where. I'm not using that as an excuse to say. I would say straight up, I supported Hillary. I wanted Hillary to win
Why?
the primaries. Because she offered the best opportunity for us to prevail in a culture where a fascist, a demagogue,
Michael Eric Dyson,
Dr. Dyson, racist was going to deploy political public policy and politics that would undermine everything you and I are talking about. Because look, if we don't have any space to exist in a culture where we can have rigorous, vigorous conversation about what the political outcome is of our rival viewpoints, if you ain't got no possibility of doing that, it's all whistling Dixie in the face of the Titanic going down.
But Dr. Dyson, this is what is so painful for us on the left. Every poll in 2016 that assessed electability demonstrated that Bernie Sanders was infinitely more electable over Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton. Every poll showed that Bernie had like a 10-point margin over Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton, except for the week or two around the Access Hollywood tape scandal, was in the margin of error of Donald Trump, of losing to Donald Trump, within the margin of error. And yet we had our best and brightest pundits like yourself on television making the opposite case, convincing the American public that Bernie was unelectable because socialism in Cuba or something, or Cubans in Florida, or some reason Chris Matthews is talking about, I'm going to get beheaded in Central Park if Bernie Sanders. All of this stuff is happening and deluding the American people to thinking that this historically unpopular candidate, Hillary Clinton, a historically unpopular candidate, was somehow going to do better against Donald Trump than the most popular senator in Congress.
Wait a minute. So are you saying then, so why didn't Bernie Sanders, two things. Bernie Sanders' prevalence there, I guess your argument would be that Hillary Clinton galvanized the elites and the political chatter class to persuade the American public to disinvest in a Bernie Sanders campaign because that would lead to, as they said in the 18th century, that way lies tears. So that would be a disaster, right?
That happened. There was the DNC rigging. There was all of the delegate shenanigans. Okay. There was states like New York moving their primary dates. There was a whole lot of shenanigans that happened, not to mention the media blackout, obviously, and this pervasive narrative that Bernie simply couldn't win. Yes, all of that was happening. All
right, let's talk about all that. We'll concede most of that. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Have you split from Bernie Sanders? Are you still with Bernie Sanders? Do you agree with, and I don't mean in terms of job. I'm talking about in terms of ideologically, in terms of political savvy, in terms of methodology and policy. Where is Bernie Sanders now? Because he's still here. Bernie Sanders is still around. What's your relationship to what he's doing right now? AOC, Bernie Sanders? I'm just asking.
Yeah, let's talk about Bernie Sanders. So I don't expect, obviously, you're like a busy man and not online, terminally Twitter pilled like some of us. But after Bernie dropped out in 2020, I unexpectedly, frankly, made a lot of hay by tweeting that, with all due respect to Bernie Sanders, I do not endorse Joe Biden, which is not something that people who work on political campaigns usually do, because they're usually looking for their next job within the political establishment and not speaking their truth. And I think that's an enormous detriment to the American public. But I, out of naivete, foolishness, or willingness to fall back on my law degree, was willing to say what I needed to say.
Right.
Okay. I ideologically agree with Bernie Sanders on policy, and I would love it if I could snap my fingers and make Bernie Sanders president right now. But in terms of political strategy, I deeply disagree with him. I disagree with his choice to drop out and endorse Joe Biden earlier than he did Hillary Clinton, and earlier than Hillary Clinton did with Barack Obama back in 2008, when there was so much on the table and there was so much leverage to be had in terms of what Joe Biden's policy was going to look like if he had held out a little bit longer, again, in the middle of this global pandemic, where so many of the crises that typically only affect the bottom tier of American society were touching so many more people, and there was a lot more potential for buy-in. As concerns their behavior now, I think that what Bernie Sanders has been saying post election is true and right and valuable. He wrote this statement, and I think followed up with an article in the Boston Globe recently about how the Democratic Party has abandoned the American people, the working people. Right. And he's gotten backlash from all of the corporate talking heads in the world, but he's fundamentally right about that. Right. My concern is that a month ago, a week and a day ago, or whatever was right before the election, he was saying a very different story, talking about how Joe Biden is the most progressive candidate since FDR. We all have to rally behind him. Now, look, Bernie Sanders didn't just say, well, look, this is what it is. We got to defeat Trump a month before the election, 6 months before the election. Before the primary even started, he and people like AOC endorsed Joe Biden, knowing, as we now know, that he was feeble, physically or mentally compromised in the ways that ultimately caused him to drop out, and precluding the possibility of a primary where, one, we could germinate, talk about popularized left solutions, progressive solutions, even liberal solutions to the problems in the world, and the way that the Republican Party had a forum in which to bandy about different approaches to Republican politics and popularize those ideas. We never got an opportunity to hear what a non-fascistic immigration plan would be, because Democrats just ran to the right, and there was no primary to popularize the idea that American sanctions on the global South are part of a huge part of what's driving the economic crises in those countries and causing people to flee to the United States of America. That's never even on the table. Again, Democrats don't persuade. They don't take opportunities to persuade to the left. They run to the right, and they are part and parcel of the onslaught of fascism in this country. They are chasing the Republicans to the right, and it's called the ratchet effect. Nothing ever brings it back to the left. Okay. That being said, I disagree with Bernie Sanders' approach there, because they created the sense of inevitability in a Biden/Harris matchup with Donald Trump again. They created that inevitability. And as much as I appreciate what they're saying now and agree with it, I think that they fundamentally had a strategic mishap, negligence.
Because they're doing, look, all of that analysis, compelling, perhaps even cogent. Here's the question. When you say they created the inevitability, they're going to say what? Excuse me, that they recognize the inevitability of what existed in terms of extant political relationships and made a calculated choice to leverage their political authority in defense of the very people who would never otherwise be heard. So
political relationships, Dr. Dyson? Political relationships are the priority here?
No, it's not political relationship. I said in service of a particular ideal that you and I would agree with, that you and they would agree with. That is, that how do the masses of people who are poor, suffering, and starving, those who are marginalized, those who are not counted within the context of American Democratic or Republican politics can make a difference and be heard. And all I'm saying to you is that if we assume in good faith that they were making a choice, whether or not you think it was right or not, but in good faith, they made choices that they thought had the greatest potential to win, back to your point earlier, that had the greatest potential to make a difference in there. Because according to you, maybe that had Bernie Sanders stayed the course, Bernie Sanders might have been able to make a difference, get elected, and then prevent or at least preclude the right of this neo-fascist or outright fascist, prospect that we have in a Donald Trump. What the problem is that Bernie Sanders is facing the math. Bernie Sanders is facing what the likely response of the very people that he's speaking on behalf of.
Wait. What are you talking about, Dr. Dyson? What are you talking about, Bernie Sanders? When it's 2022,
right,
or beginning of 2023, and we're a year and a half ahead of Election Day, and Bernie Sanders and AOC and all of these progressives come out and endorse Joe Biden, when there's plenty of chatter at the time that Joe Biden, oldest president in the history of presidents, is not doing very well. But the mainstream media is insisting right up until the day he drops out that he's Peachy King and everything else is a right-wing conspiracy theory. What are the numbers? The internal numbers we know were that Joe Biden was facing a 400 electoral college defeat. Right. So what are these numbers that these, like, what is this game that progressives are ostensibly playing that makes it a smart move for them to want to shut down a primary and shut down any conversation about having a better matchup? Well,
because first of all, look, there's been some darn prognostications about, with these political Nostradamuses about what, how many electoral votes one might win. And we know that math has been off. Even in this election we just had, there were very few
Dr.
predictions.
Dyson,
There were very
400? No.
There were very few. There were very few predictions that Donald Trump was even going to land at the level he did, except among.
That's not true. Dr. Dyson, that's not true. The polls were not wrong this time around. It was a close race. Every poll leading up to the election showed that it was a close race.
As the poll said.
Dr. Dyson, this was not a polling era election. There was that one weird Seltzer poll where that one woman said that they thought that Kamala was going to clean up in Iowa. People were rightly skeptical of that poll at the time, and it ended up to be enormously wrong. But every other poll leading up to this election showed that it was going to be close.
Right, close. But I'm saying, do you think the outcome was close? I don't think it was close. I don't think it was
that
close.
There was not the actual margin of loss, but that the likelihood of Donald Trump winning was basically 50-50.
Yeah, okay. That's but so you're saying that the 411 ain't no close race that Biden would have been landslided, right?
Yes, I'm saying 400 electoral votes is an entirely red country with California, New York, and Massachusetts.
Of course. And I'm saying despite the prognostication about the proximate, that the distance between the two was going to be very narrow, it turned out not to be as narrow as predicted. That's all I'm saying. And you're saying
that Trump that Trump won more than was anticipated. And so what do you take from that?
Well, first of all, my point is that I was trying to make is that we can prognosticate that Biden was going to, that 411 electoral votes were going to go in the opposite direction. This would be a completely red state. I'm saying that just to give credence to the fact that the numbers don't always pan out the way we predict that they do.
Dr. Dyson.
That some people, I'm saying that to conclude that, and he made his whole political hay on comeback kid, able to overcome what people thought, because we know polls are a snapshot in time. They ain't no predictor. It's no accurate barometer of what possibly will occur. It is either more likely to occur or less likely to occur, but it's not ironclad. And I'm saying that little wiggle room has given people the prospect of being able to move forward, because otherwise the logic of what you're arguing would be decimated, right? Because if we look at the math of what you're speaking about and the likelihood of people who have a third party organization to prevail, that thing is real small. If we base it upon the very empirical proof you're looking for to predict an outcome, then you ain't got no chance.
Wait a minute. I just want to be really clear.
Right.
The argument is that because some polls are not strictly predictive,
Right.
and that some polls sometimes are wrong, that Democrats were right to ignore, as long as they did, Joe Biden's historic unpopularity.
That's
and polls.
Okay.
No. And polls that showed it's not Monday morning quarterbacking.
Come on about his mental,
wait a minute.
confidence. Okay.
No, it's not Monday morning quarterbacking because some of us on the left who get ignored, who aren't invited on MSNBC, have been screaming loudly that, of course, this is the reality for years. That is not Monday morning. You can go back.
Were y'all saying that? Were y'all saying that
last
before?
summer?
Wait a minute. Were y'all
Dr.
saying
Dyson.
that before? Wait a minute. Hold on. No, this is what I'm saying. Were you actually saying before the debate that Joe Biden's cognitive capacity is
Of course. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.